So we're thinking to have the discussion first. Is that okay? And then the long life prayers and a couple of other things.
Okay, thank you.
Oh.
This is your friend.
Okay.
It doesn't look like it. Yeah.
So, first of all, thank you so much for your talks this morning. So, calm abiding in this recitation that we did, I'll now practice absorption of calm abiding in order to release all beings from their particular suffering. There's a little bit of a logical disconnect
Ooh.
between sitting,
Bad
just
news.
sitting. No, I know. I'm just, trying to get your reflection on this.
Yeah.
Sitting in meditation calmly, maybe without much thought, and then the release, this particular suffering of beings being released from that activity. So I have a non-understanding of how that works, and also an acknowledgement, like for instance, that these lineage teachers do have an impact on my life. So I do grant that it happens, but anyway, just invite your reflection.
The reflection on which
On the
part of it?
connection of the practice of calm abiding
Yeah.
to the release of particular suffering of beings.
Yeah. Yeah. Good question. Thank you. Well, the truth is that it often causes some suffering. Calm abiding. For example, the instruction is so simple. You sit down, you lie down, you stand up, however you want to do it, and you release your busy mind and relax in your natural awareness. And that's very difficult. Have you tried it? I don't mean to put you on the spot, but there you are.
He's trying.
It's hard, isn't it?
It's peculiar to say the least.
Yeah. So that's partly why I say in the beginning of practicing Buddhism, that was the most disturbing thing of all. Wasn't the understanding of how to do the practice. It was the idea that we would do something that would leave our mind kind of naturally free and relaxed somehow, and it just had the opposite effect. Partly because, you're smart, you have a good job in the world and all, and all we're asking you to do, because you just sit down and, you're able to sit down and shut up, but you're not able to sit down and not just keep thinking about irrelevant things. And so it was disturbing in that way. Is that what you mean by disturbing or something else?
Well, what I was hoping to hear more about was the connection of the practice of calm abiding to the release of particular suffering of other beings.
Oh, well, that one's easy. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Yeah. It's easy because of this. Many of us have had connections with what I think many of us would call great beings, individuals who actually could do these practices really quite well. And often, in a group or individually with one of them, you would just have the unmistakable presence and a natural sense of, that's what I want. I want that. The presence without the busyness, the clarity without the conceptual overlays, just the natural presence. And that was kind of something that occasionally visited, but not with any reliability. And to some degree, I'd say that's still true in the direct effort to practice shamatha. But the benefit for others is unmistakable. Unmistakable. If you can engage in that practice and you sit down with somebody else, and let's say they're pretty busy, so they're wanting to talk and all, if you can actually be still, they get a lot out of that. Because it's immediately recognizable. Oh, they're not doing what I'm doing. And they're also not apparently in the same anxious state that I'm in. So it's an issue of example. The example is palpable. So I think that's a simple piece. Also, if you encounter a situation that requires you to make a decision of some kind, any decision, whether you're going to buy this brand of soap or that brand of soap, it doesn't matter what it is, some kind of a decision where you don't give in to reactive patterns, where you can just be still for a period of time and then make some easy move of some kind. But the reactive patterns are what really get us. They really get us. They get us especially when we're stressed by virtue of conflicted situations, by virtue of not getting what we hoped we'd get from something. You know, it's like we wanted to go to Mexico and there was a hurricane, so we couldn't go. And so then for 3 years we talk about what an awful vacation that was. I never want to go to that place again, and so on. So just the ability to just stop, so helpful. Is that enough? Yeah. Okay, great. Mary.
So I think that Zilpa and I kind of talked about a couple of things that she thought might be good to bring up as questions. And I think we might have talked about the benefits a little bit just now. Because I have maybe a slightly different tangent on that, which was, I really tried to work with when you thinking of benefiting somebody or individuals I have aversion to. So things or people I have aversion to, and that was, of course, very juicy, and mostly noticing how I didn't want to do it, of course, but to some extent being able to do it. But then the question came up for me in my mind, like, I'm between their benefit, and I thought, so what is their benefit? So, like, am I wishing that they'll make another $1 million? Or am I wishing what? I mean, our discussion kind of, you helped me kind of think about this a little more too, but anyway. So thinking about, like, when we're thinking of somebody else's benefit, what is the view one holds?
What is the view?
The view you hold when you're thinking, I'm doing my practice to benefit this person I don't like. So I want to benefit them, but I'm trying to think. Then, and maybe it's wrong to even try to be conceptual about what that means. Could be the answer, I suppose. Zilpa, when we were talking about it, one thing that came up was that it would be wishing that they would realize their unborn nature. So that could be the answer, but I was just curious if there was anything else around that. Or is that completely unclear?
Not completely, no.
That's one of us. I mean.
No, that's fine. Well, we're talking here, of course, Mary, about just about bodhicitta. And when we talk about benefiting others, that's what bodhicitta is all about. It's interesting, I think, to ask the question. Though I think sometimes we're embarrassed to ask this question, so I'll ask it for you and anybody else who doesn't feel like asking it. Why do I have to do this for somebody else? And why on top of that is someone else's happiness more important than mine? Because sometimes we feel like it's like we've stepped into the wrong room. It's like I didn't mean to come up to sign up as a martyr, for example. You know, it wasn't what I was looking for. Maybe I could do that later. and I think the reason why we don't ask that very often is because we know that that's not what it is, but it somehow feels like that's what it is, or that it has some element of that. Like, I give up all these things and get nothing back. And it sounds kind of crude and coarse in one way, but on the other way, it's just the honest truth. Like, would I really want to do something that never benefited me and only benefited others? Is that possible to do that? Many people will say, and many people have written in otherwise, I would say, pretty powerful books, that it's impossible that the altruistic approach to benefiting others, putting aside totally one's own personal benefit, is impossible. Now, I don't think that's impossible. I actually think that is possible, and I think in a certain way, from a deep perspective, it's a false question with a false answer. Because we have known individuals who fundamentally, all appearances indicate they're not concerned with their own benefit at all. And yet, they appear to be happier and more contented than anybody else. So if that's martyrdom, we all want it. It's just that it looks like that because that's our idea of what martyrdom looks like. All of the good goes to somebody else and you have to make some big sacrifice for it. I think the mystery here, the kind of, let's just call it the mystery, is that we naturally feel like we should be able to accomplish our own benefit. It's a natural feeling. Even maybe our parents encourage us, you need to accomplish your own benefit. You don't just keep coming to us asking for another $100. It's like you need to accomplish your own benefit. And yet, the benefit we're talking about is a small benefit. Like, oh, I'm so glad you got a job for $10 an hour, or even $1,000 an hour. none of us, I think, believe that no matter how much you're making, that that's going to lead to happiness, right? That is not it. We've all kind of been screwed, if I can say that, by that illusion. That if I just got this, I would be good. And then you get that, and it isn't there. So it's really, really requires a sense of the connection. So when I think of the line that I love so much, you cannot accomplish your own benefit, full stop. Like, you can't. There's nothing there. Most people will say that it just doesn't make any sense to me. But I think for us, working on these things, we can stop for a little bit and really ponder that. Like, is that really true? Or maybe more importantly, I know I'm thirsty and I can go and get a glass of water over and over. That's accomplishing my own benefit. Yeah, that's true. That's better than just dying from lack of water. But we're talking about a different kind of benefit. Some of the interesting texts in our tradition, we should make a note. We should do a teaching on this thing called the 4 Special Foundations. Maybe next month on the beginning, the 4 Special Foundations. They're really good. They address this very question. But in the teachings on the 4 Special Foundations, there is what is a list, like what appears in many texts, of what are the characteristics of someone who has a high level of realization. And in this one book, which was a text that Bokar Rinpoche had summarized, and it was, available in India for a long time. And at the time, I had a hard time understanding it because it was too condensed. So it was just hard to figure, like, what are we getting at here? But in time, there was another longer text that had that piece in it. So the characteristic that identified someone who was probably highly realized was the utter absence of fear at all levels. Not like you're stupid, not afraid, like I'm not afraid of cars, I can run in front of a bus, I won't be hurt. Not that kind of absence of fear, but intelligent absence of fear. And most of the things that we're afraid of is personal challenge to who we think we are. That's probably the biggest fear that we all share. And it just seems so ridiculous. Why would we be afraid of that? But when we look, we see, only half a dozen times a day am I afraid of that, I don't want to go over and see that person because I'm afraid they'll say this to me, and then I'll have to deal with that, or I might have to kill them or something. So there's this kind of misunderstanding that the more bravado we have, the more capable we are. And so in that teaching on the 4 Special Foundations, if you follow the examples from the beginning, it starts at the very beginning, the 4 thoughts that turn the mind. The most basic thing in the entire tradition, the 4 thoughts that turn the mind. I bet half the people in here could recite them. True? 4 thoughts turn the mind. It's the very first thing. It's like, do not move into this place until you actually have done those 4 thoughts. And then, one by one, you step through it. And actually, conceptually, it's almost totally easy. With very little explanation, everybody would get it. The 4 Special Foundations. And they're not things to do. All our other things that we say, like the 4 thises and the 4 that's, it's like the Noondros, the 4 Noondro practices, and so on. These are all practices. They're things to do, things that are challenging to do, even. And in this case, the Four Special Foundations are not practices, they are milestones. They basically, you read those things and you can say, oh, I see where I am on the path. I'm at this place. And because nobody's grading you, you tend to be more honest. And you look at it and see like, I'm definitely not free of fear. That's for sure. And that's the highest, that's the pinnacle, freedom from fear. And a slightly different one, a different text, it says the highly advanced practitioner, taking into account that the practice of devotion to your teacher is part of the important path in the Vajrayana. And that devotion is also kind of held up by virtue of humility, a strong sense of humility. And so they say, the highly realized person has perfect devotion, perfect humility, and yet can stand in front of 1,000 people and present a teaching on the Dharma while they know that there are many people in that 1,000-person audience, many people who know much more than they do without feeling a sense of fear. I mean, normally, if you present something to 1,000 people and it's serious stuff, and you know that there are people who know more about it than you do, there's a tendency to suddenly get sick. Like, I don't want to do this. So this person does not shrink from it and also isn't moving into a place of bravado. It's just like, you just do that. And if it feels difficult, well, that's just the nature of the mind. So then they're watching the mind to see, like, what is it doing? Where is it going? This is the thing. Like, all of the practices are really meant to take us into that mind, so we can be present with it. We can see what's going on, not with our eyes, but with the mind's eye. What do you think, Mary?
That's good.
That's it? What was it?
It's something to chew on.
I have nothing more to say.
Ah. I think that we should get that text actually at some point and do things with it. It's the one time that I went through that was on the 1-year retreat, actually. You must remember that.
Is it?
Maybe.
Fish.
Well, he did a summary of it,
Okay.
a summary text
This
on
was
it.
the
Yeah.
summary. Yeah.
So first, I'd like to express my appreciation for your skill at anticipating my question. And it has to do with the purification of the deluded mind.
Yeah.
If I remember what you said that it's a process, I guess a series of iterations interspersed with some clarity. And I think you said
Yeah.
that we need to pay attention to this experience of clarity or respect it.
Yeah.
But my experience has been different. I've been practicing for 2.5 years, And there have been several times when I thought that I had learned a lesson, that I had insight, clarity, if you will, only to realize that that was delusional.
That
And
was
this
what? That it was what?
delusional.
Oh, I see.
And this morning, after your instruction for us to use as the object of meditation a experience, perhaps with a person that we wanted to support with our practice, perhaps someone who we didn't care for, I had the experience of realizing, after thinking, meditating, that I could make the same mistakes again.
So what followed that?
I guess determination to continue practicing and to be earnest in trying to express bodhicitta.
So are you exploring what might be useful? Is that? Trying to see where we are here.
I'm trying to, I guess, refine my practice and to recognize where it, I guess, has not been adequate, or where I have made efforts which perhaps were not completely sincere, to appreciate that and to revisit the effort to express bodhicitta, perhaps with greater clarity.
It's mental state, right? In a certain way, it's nothing more or less than that. As we were talking about this morning, we are constantly training ourselves in some direction or another, and probably more often than not, we're doing it without knowing that we're doing it. Casual speech, casual opinions about ourselves and others definitely trains the mind in whatever direction we're going at that time. So I think the difference with formal bodhicitta is that we are formally embracing that as a piece of the path, that we will make an effort to ideally, continuously have our minds in the place of wishing well the benefit of others. It's interesting. I think in order to really get at the heart of many of our things, we have to kind of catch ourselves out a whole bunch of times. Because there's nobody who trains their own mind thoroughly conscious of what they're doing and consistently. It just, I can't imagine who that would be. And yet, there's plenty of examples in the world of people who did get things lined up and working in a way which was kind of marvelous. But there's so many things going on in our lives. We have so many things, and so many pushes and pulls, and things that are pleasant and unpleasant. And even with our best effort and consistent positive intention, it still is clearly a steep hill. I think it's one of the benefits of a sangha is that numerous people, to say it slightly funny, are all suffering from the same thing. So we recognize each other. Oh, you're doing that too. It's good. We know it's good. Like, to hold the best benefit is, I always use the idea that there's no such thing as a sentient being, whether it's an insect or a human being or an elephant or some ghost or whatever it might be. There's no such thing as a sentient being who does not deserve to be happy. No matter what they did, they deserve to be happy. If you carry that enough, and enough people know and recognize that you're carrying it, they begin to make that wish for you too. I think that's how we get into wars and out of wars. How we get into love and out of love. It's like it's the simple fact that the mind will continue to create images and experiences whether we want them or not. And to a great degree, no matter how good we are, and I think even the great beings in this lineage, like Bogor Rinpoche forward, the Karmapa, the Dalai Lama has said, I don't control my thoughts. I don't get to decide what I'm thinking all the time. So then you think like, if he can't do it. So it doesn't mean that it's hopeless. It might be that what you're thinking you're trying to do maybe is hopeless. If the mind could be still and still endless images and thoughts and things kind of coming down the tube, but you just see it like water running out of the faucet. That's a lot different than wrestling with every last thing that comes down. Maybe a couple of words about the distinction between the ultimate and the relative on this. The relative approach is what we're talking about. That is to say, I'm going to hold the benefit of all beings, even though the great vast majority of them I have never seen, will not see in this life, don't know, have never met them. But I believe that the entire universe would be better if I held the view that there was not a single one of them who didn't deserve to be happy, to deserve to be kind, to deserve to experience compassion, no matter how bad they'd done. So that is the relative approach to it. And that's kind of a prerequisite to the ultimate. But the ultimate sometimes can be an added inspiration in the midst of the difficulties of the relative. And that one thing is that the continuous experiences which emanate from, we sometimes call it the Dharmakaya, the images that emanate continuously without our effort or in spite of our effort, and that are often crazy and also sane and brilliant and stupid and everything else. It's like the whole garbage pit comes down through that tube, it seems. And if we can hold in the midst of understanding that that is actually nothing, that it just comes down like that, there's no intention, it doesn't require intention. That's why I say when the Dalai Lama says, I don't get to decide what I'm thinking sometimes. It just goes. You could either throw the whole thing out because it doesn't promise to do what we hoped it would do, or you could decide, maybe I was wishing for the wrong thing. But you can also see that that relative and ultimate, the provisional and the definitive, it's sometimes called. Like the relative is provisional. It's affected by relative things in the world. The definitive is not. But even the Buddha was skillful on this. When he was dying, it said that he said that in the future, many of the things that I taught and that you learned will not be appropriate. Other cultures, other times, and the provisional truth should always bend to fit the culture, the people who are practicing. It's not for any other reason. It has to be made appropriate for them. So therefore, you should do that. But when it comes to the ultimate, since we all share precisely the same awakened mind, not the same awakened mind like yours and mine are identical or the same, but the clear, unfettered, awakened mind. The means by which we encounter that and recognize it is the ultimate practice, and that should not be changed, no matter where it goes. But the vast majority of the practices are cultural based for that reason. It's for people. It's not, I like to think of it from this perspective. If I say something to you and you don't understand it, that's my problem. I need to make it clear enough so that you understand it. And if the person next to you doesn't understand it, that's my problem. I got to make it clear enough so they get it also. And of course, it has to be authentic. So I think that's a puzzle for us also. The person who's delivering the message should read the message clearly, enunciate it, make sure that it's accurate, and all of that. And in the same way, I think when we teach and share the teachings, this is a provisional, a relative approach to things. That's what we're exploring, because there's nothing to talk about when it comes to the ultimate. But joy and compassion and loving kindness are also relative practices, but it's always taught that without those, you never get to the ultimate. So there's these pieces have been like laid out in a certain way for some skillful means, so that there's a way to step into it and discover what needs to be discovered. I think I'm at the end of my honesty. Suvanch.
So, Lama Michael, I want to go to that, the same question that Mary raised. So in the morning, you gave us the practice, right? Take a few minutes, look at your enemy, and make the wish that their benefit is above yours, right? Their benefit is primary.
Yeah.
So I have to be candid. After doing the 10 minutes, I wanted to go home after that.
You are home. It's okay.
And I think I felt like I was dragged through the mud.
You say that again.
I was dragged through the mud.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And I felt like if I sat with you and I made a list, this is my enemy, this is what the enemy did, and I made a list,
Yeah.
then I'm fairly certain you would agree that, yes, this is a real enemy. Okay? I mean, this is truly somebody who has caused pain.
Yeah.
Okay? And let's say you would agree with me on that.
Okay.
At least this is what's going on through my mind, right, as I'm
Yeah.
going through this exercise.
Yeah.
So let's say that was my first step. Okay. So then I said to myself, well, I'm not a good enough practitioner, right, to not be able to even go through this exercise. And, I was hoping that 10 minutes would be over. But actually, that's a part of it. I often think, I'm not good enough to do some of these difficult things. Okay? And it kind of hurts me, right? Maybe it hurts my pride. Okay?
Yeah.
So I said, well, let's persevere a little bit more.
Mm.
And the next thing I said is, well, this same practice comes up when you do loving kindness practice and you do it for various people, or when you do Chenrezig practice and you offer, you clean up the realms, right?
Yes.
The same issue comes up for me.
Yes.
So I struggle with it there too. And about 3 years ago or 4 years ago, I had a one-on-one with Zopa.
Uh-huh.
And she said to me that, Suvansh, you should do this. If you cannot come to that point, then ask the Buddha to do it for you.
Yeah.
Okay? So I said, well, maybe that's a way out for me, right? Ask the Buddha, right? So, I actually, quite often I'll do that. And I trust that, Let the Buddha make the decision, If that person's benefit, really if you take the two sides of the ledger, okay, and the Buddha can do it, I can't do it. Okay? So then I said to myself, well, you're still not, try a little bit more. And so I said, well, okay, maybe I'll do something, but I don't want that person to ever know that I did it for them. Okay? But I couldn't get to the place where I could really, with full enthusiasm, right, just say, yes, I'm going to work for their benefit after what they've put me through. And after what you would agree with me, that they actually did put me through this.
Oh, sure. We all do that. That's easy to agree with. Putting each other through stuff is...
Our job.
Yeah,
That's what we do.
I'm certain of it. I'm certain of it, and I think there are times when the pain is sufficient that it's really quite difficult, almost impossible, to recommend that somebody put their full attention on the kindness or benefit of another person, usually a specific person. I have sometimes said, I think it's too early. And obviously, the person I'm speaking to, whoever that is, that's really their place. So I think it's not helpful. It's not helpful to encourage. I'll just say kind of flat out. It's not helpful to encourage the practice of bodhicitta too strongly for someone at a particular time who cannot do it. Not helpful. There's nothing evil about not practicing bodhicitta. Let's make that clear. That's not evil, because the great majority of us can't do it, and the even greater majority of us can't do it all the time. That's what it is. So we sometimes have to take a break. I do. I mean, we don't have to flip it from I'm trying to hold the benefit of this person too. I hope the worst thing that could happen to them happens. We don't have to go that far. But we can back away from it a little bit. And we don't have to say, I'm not good enough also. This is not so helpful. It's an effort to be humble, so maybe that's helpful, but it also can be detrimental in that maybe we sort of not so secretly decide, I'm never going to do this. That's a mistake, because you never know when you're going to encounter someone who shocks you, someone who cares about you so much that it melts all your resistance. Because these things don't always come from the side. Like, I would like to actually not just wish to benefit, but benefit all sentient beings. Of course, nobody's told me how difficult that is, but it sounds like a nice thing to do. But then when I encounter it and I discover that many of the people who I thought I would like to benefit, actually, they just cause me too much trouble. So do I say I'm not capable of doing it? I say, it's like I ride my 3-wheel tricycle, but I'm not sure about that big Harley. It's like we just gotta go slow. But at the same time, you're suffering. So we don't want to lose track of the question. How do I end my suffering? So you can go into another neutral place, be creative about it. Like, I actually would be happy if everyone was free of their suffering, because I'm one of the everyones. So I can at least go that far. I'm one of the everyone. So if everyone, that would be really good. I could go for that. There's a lot of examples like this. A lot of very nice stories, like the one of the Buddha's disciples who was so stingy that the Buddha had to get creative to help him become generous. He had plenty of things to share with others, but he just couldn't do it. He was inherently stingy. So they did this thing where he was given an apple, some kind of food, and then he was asked, could you give it to your left hand? And it was sort of like trying to do it, and just couldn't do it at first. Even that. I don't know how true that story was, but ultimately, help from a few disciples of the Buddha, which it took, he did it. So things that seem ridiculous to one person are actually Mount Everest to another. And you just gotta, I think it's the best advice in all of those situations is, are you doing your best? And if you're not doing your best, then maybe there's something to look at. But your best doesn't have to be Buddha Shakyamuni. Some kind of improvement. I remember a few years ago when it was about 5 years ago, oh no, it was more than that, maybe 7 or 8, that there was a conflict that I was embroiled in. And it was very difficult to get out of that. And especially, you know, the venom directed at me personally. I could deal with the venom that somebody directed to somebody else, like what we're doing right now. That's easy, you know. Let's help Savanch, you know. That's great. But when it's me, now, and everybody looks at me like, you don't need to help him. He can do this stuff. So then you feel like, now what? This is just also the stuff that you're already familiar with. You've had positions in big companies, so you know what that looks like on its own. It's its own separate rat race in a certain way, like very difficult often. And there's an inherent level of blackmail, like do what you need to do or you're out of here. All these things happen. And sometimes learning to work with those things are not helpful in the context of bodhicitta. So we have to kind of redefine the environment that we're in. Like we're actually surrounded by people, as pretty much we are in this very moment, who care about us. And so it's easier to care about them. And we want to move in the direction of whether they care about me or not. I will care about them. And partly, I have to say from my own side, that sense did not come out of a sense of goodness, like feeling like I was good. I mean, I think it was good, but that wasn't what drove it. What drove it was curiosity. Just in my own case, I was just curious. What happens if you put your attention on other people all the time, every day? Which I'm not saying that I've ever been able to do that. But when I could do it, then I was curious, how do you stabilize this? What do you get for it? All those questions. It felt sort of like a scientific experiment in a certain way, like what'll happen? Because I know what happens when I put the attention on what I need. I need some hot water, I need to get some soap and wash my hands, and I need to take the money to the bank, and all these things, which we all know how to do so easily. And then suddenly there's something that is very difficult to do, and we're competent at so many things, and this thing stretches us to the limit, and it just feels like it shouldn't have that power. It's not that big. So we need to work with it in chunks. Just kind of parse it. Parse it. There's one, I remember reading in one authoritative book, I think it was Thupten Chimpa's book on the mind training, where he said, if you can't love your neighbors, perhaps you could love your children. Something like that, you know. Perhaps you could start there. And there wasn't any more, but I elaborated that in my own mind. Like there have been times in my life when I preferred my pet over other humans. but I, later I realized everybody prefers their pet over others sometimes, and so you get something when that happens. It's even your pet. You look after the pet, and what happens? The pet looks satisfied. And then the cat comes and curls up in your lap and it purrs. And you have the sense of it's happy. And when it's happy, the connection between your effort to satisfy it and make it comfortable clicks. And you feel good.
Thank you.
What? Of course, you have to.
Well, this comes off your question and Mary and I talking at lunch. I do this, well, I'm going to say this, and I'm not sure it's accurate. I approach this out of pretty much self-interest. So it goes like this. The person who has harmed me very badly, and I feel angry and hurt, and I definitely don't want to be around them physically. But if that person could be happy and could find peace, they would stop hurting others. And if they had been happy and peaceful in their mind, when they hurt me, they wouldn't have done it. Because happy, peaceful people don't go around, hurting people. So even someone I really, really dislike now, I work with this of wishing them, let's say, early retirement, or play golf all you want, be happy. Because, so for me, then I see my wish that they have that benefits me right away in a couple ways. My anger starts going down. My obsession with them goes down. And if they really, really got that, they'd stop creating suffering in the world. So why would I not wish that? Why would I not? That became my koan for a while. Why would I not wish my enemy happiness? Why? What does that get me? It's a really good thing to think about. What does it get me to not wish them happiness? And both happiness of regular worldly stuff, like I hope they have food, shelter, clothing, medicine, friends, housing, good times, and I wish them the ultimate happiness that they understand their Buddha nature.
So I'm with you on that.
So that to me seems self-interest based, which is kind of strange.
There are gradations, and I can do that practice. I can get there, so I can make the wish, they be happy. But I don't want to be close to them. But Lama Michael said another thing. He said in the morning, he said, do something for their benefit.
You're doing it when you wish.
Well, okay, that's easy. That to me seems easy. It's, or maybe I read more into your question.
Well, the first thing
you hope so. See, he hopes so.
Yeah.
So when you're actually actively doing something for their benefit, it's like
Well, that's the advanced class.
Well, yeah, and
I'm a beginner.
And well, for me at least, in the scenario I'm thinking of, I just want to. I can make the wish, but I don't want them to know about it. I want to walk away from it, and it's going to be very hard to actually work for their benefit. I think that seems like, the master's level, not even the undergraduate.
Yeah, I get it. But, with bodhicitta, there's even the language. First we do aspirational bodhicitta. That's the wish. That's the first step. Then you do engaged, And you could say sitting on the cushion with that wish is an engagement. I'm not going to go and throw my arms around somebody who, slapped my face, Well, I still do hug my sister now, but but we pretend that she never hit me. It's kind of some kind of agreement there, because it's 60 years ago or something, but it's gone. But I'm with you. I come right back to the Pema Chodron, start where you are. Don't start where you can't be. I had this Catholic nun. One time I was just struggling over something, this Catholic nun friend, and she looked at me and she said, well, why don't you do it how you can instead of how you can't? And I've carried that saying, like, I can't do this, I can't do this. And then I think of Sister Guadalupe and I go, well, why don't I do this how I can? And then I break it up in little pieces and go, I can do that. Instead of, I can't do it, I can't do it. See, looks a little like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Whew. It's a good discussion.
Okay, great. So just as discussion, the question I asked is actually pretty much the same as in my mind. And it's this, like, here's the answer that I'm reading here. If I want to do something, try absorption of calm abiding. So when you say try it, this is kind of like high level, but give it a try, like address somebody that you have that's a little bit disturbing. Do something. Well, practice absorption of calm abiding is like the something to do. That's why I asked.
Why not?
We think it's not doing, but it is doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a different doing. It's the higher doing, actually. The higher doing is the not doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because generally speaking, we are never not doing. It's day and night, awake, asleep, at the wheel of our mind training, really. What's your name? I don't know. William? Nice to meet you, William. I think this puzzle is more relevant today, actually, than probably in my life it's ever been, with all the abuse issues and things that are going on. It's really paramount importance that we work on this very puzzle of how to engage the very thing that we don't want to engage, because we haven't found something that's more profound in terms of stepping out of the pain. And yet the stepping out of the pain involves a certain kind of, in some places it's referred to like an heroic move to step into the place of benefiting another, even when it's only a mental state. Like, I hope this person actually comes to a good place somehow. And yet, in the back of our minds, that wish is neutralized by something else sometimes. And that's unfortunate.
But we can fake it.
We can fake it. That's right.
Until we make
That's
it.
right.
Fake it till we make
Yeah. Yeah, it's a real, faking it is a real undervalued method. And it's interesting because every one of us learned to walk and talk and add a column of figures and everything else by faking it. Nobody just did that without practice and instruction and all sorts of other things. And yet we feel like it's demeaning to fake it,
Yeah.
which is slightly weird. So I think if we can notice that actually, without the ability to fake it, none of us would have accomplished anything. And it's still a good strategy. And another thing about it that's nice is no one has to know you're faking it.
Except
No one
you.
has to know you're even trying, except
You
you.
have to
Yeah,
know.
you have to know.
Yeah.
Yep. Well,
It's like we dress up as Chenrezig in our minds until we can be Chenrezig. Or Venerable Children says, Some of you that became doctors when you were a little kid, you dressed up with the doctor stuff, you know. You got a little kid and put the stethoscope on. She says, like, that's like what we're doing until we get it. Yeah, and still now. Yeah.
I'm wondering if, Lama Michael, you could comment on the purpose of prayer. Not so much a prayer to the lineage or of gratefulness, but a prayer like for someone who is sick.
Yeah. Like a wish for their getting better, or
Right.
peaceful death or something.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. I want to confess first that just to level the playing field, that I would say 30 years ago, no one was more cynical about prayer than me, or about anything else that had to do with anything spiritual. So I never prayed. But following, really studying the mind training tradition more than anything else, it just became clear that no matter what I was doing, I was training my mind. And I was training my mind in the direction of cynicism, which at the time seemed like a virtue. But and I used to also, in the same time that I was doing that, I was also taking taxi cabs from Calcutta right up past Sonada, where Kala Rinpoche was living at that time. But I never met him there. He would have found it humorous at this point. When you think of prayer, do you think of its effect on you personally, or do you think about its effect on others?
Well, when I personally think about it, I do try and think about both of those, but I guess the part of me that has the biggest question is about the effect on others.
Yeah.
And whether, how that fits in and how that would work.
Yeah. I thought you might say that. I think it's natural to say that. In a certain way, driven by, let's say, a wish. That if I say a prayer for someone who's having a difficult time dying, for example, if I say a prayer, I hope it will ease their pain. But I'm not so sure that the effect of saying the prayer at a time when it feels very, very much from the heart, laden with tears, perhaps, and the result of that, saying that prayer, almost unquestionably affects the person who said it. Definitely we know that much. The person who said it is deeply affected by saying it. But we don't give much credibility, and this is where I think we fall down a little bit culturally. We don't give much credibility to the effect of the prayer on the person who said it, which is then transmitted kind of like a disease, you could say, and the disease is kindness, which is to say your prayer was the prayer of comfort, of being free of the disease, or if you're dying, it's a comfortable and maybe even inspiring passing. But we don't give much credibility to you who said the prayer with such strong experience behind it, emotional experience and caring experience from knowing this person, when in fact, after saying the prayer and you visit that person, it may be the most profound moment that you spend with that person in this life. Because of what I would say, believe it or not, the truth of interconnectedness. Imagine that everything that you think or do or say, everything that you have ever said or thought or did, those are the things that land you where you're sitting right now. And you can't know what they are. But I cannot imagine any other way of explaining why you're here and I'm here and everybody's here. Other people aren't. I can't imagine any other explanation. The thing about the Buddhist tradition is that we don't put a stop and start on it. So the interconnectedness has no beginning. It has no original roots. You can't mark the beginning of it. You can't mark the end of it. So when you say the prayer, it's kind of like you pour that sentiment into your own mind stream, which has no beginning and no end, no start and no finish. If that makes sense to you, then there's an interesting practice to engage in, which is, and I say it's a practice because I think that it's one of those practices that bears its fruit through seeing it directly. That when you say the prayer, and let's say I could have done this when my father was dying, because I spent about 3 weeks with him during the time he was dying. And we'd had such, I wouldn't say we'd had a really rough time. We just had the rough time that kids and their parents have when they're dying. It wasn't anything extraordinary. It was difficult. But if someone had suggested this, I would have taken it on with bravado, which is, when you say prayers for your dying father, what effect does that have on you? And when you look at yourself and your relationship with others, what effect does that have on the others? And their response to that, what effect does that have on you? Like, how does the chain, kind of the causal chain, do this thing? Because I think that's actually where the power goes. We're looking in the wrong place. My big fat opinion is, we're looking in the wrong place when we say a prayer. And this, maybe if I was Christian, and I don't feel like I'm non-Christian, but I'm definitely not an evangelist. and I think in that context, we're looking for something that is, we're asking some other power to intervene somehow and do something. And my sense is that we are that power. And we are intervening at the time of saying a prayer. And it does carry a result. But we may not see it or recognize it because we're looking for the result somewhere else. Which doesn't change the result. It just changes we don't get to see it. Since we don't get to see it because we're looking in the wrong place, then maybe we don't have a lot of confidence in it. Not having a lot of confidence in it, we don't intentionally practice it. So it kind of goes like that. That's my sense of it. So it comes down to preference, is actually my own sense of it is. I prefer to think that if somebody I know is having a difficult time, and the more difficult it is, the more inclined I am to engage in it experientially, not necessarily with that person, but just in my own mind stream. I'm more inclined to engage in it in my own mind stream, and I'm more inclined to think, due to the truth of interdependence, which seems to me almost, in my own mind, it's indisputable. Therefore, I feel like the best thing that I can do is imagine that person getting well, which it's not magic. Person may not get well. It's more an issue of the good wish, the constant sense that we wish good for every being, or as many as we can, and for as long as we can. And that is the way that we fill the world with goodness, and we combat things that are very negative and destructive. And it's not visible most of the time. You don't get to see any of it. But when we do it ourselves, with ourselves, we are privy to seeing the whole thing exactly as we wished for it to be.
Thank you very much.
What?
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, we're getting late. It's tomorrow already.
This last discussion raised a question in my mind about whether I realize there is a benefit to me of saying prayer or thinking about the well-being of people who are deceased. I've done that, and it helped me. But I wonder if it's worth continuing to practice that.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, here you are. You're actually just the living proof that it actually affects you. And because of your experience, then we all have hear that experience. It's like, it goes like that. You're saying what you just said then, this is the appropriate environment to say that in. It's the most effective place to say it in. There may be other places that are effective to say it in. Anywhere you say it, anything you do as a response of it bears a result of some kind. I think this is one of the, this is where the whole thing of karma comes in. Karma is really just a kind of modification approach to the truth of interdependence. I remember once somebody asked Kala Rinpoche, if you're a bank robber and you die, do you constantly lose all your belongings because somebody steals it from you? And Kala Rinpoche laughed, and he said, no, of course not. If you're a bank robber and you die, in your next life, you become a better bank robber. He said that. He meant that. He actually said it, and then we questioned it. He said, no, that's what you were good at. That's what you did. Those are the things you set in motion. That's what will follow you forward. It's not. This is not a crime and punishment and reward system. It's simple. And I really thought about that, and I thought, that really makes sense to me. That really makes sense to me. If you routinely murder your enemies in this life, you will do that more easily in your next life. It'll just be almost natural to do it. That doesn't mean that you will enjoy it or that it will bring something positive to you. No, probably it will bring terrible things to you. But it's not a punishment. It's kind of like, example I like, from here I walk on a gravel road up to my house. If I pick up handfuls of gravel and throw it in the air, some of that gravel will land on my head. And the more gravel I pick up, the more likely it is that a larger rock will land on my head. It's the exact same thing. It's not accidental. It's just the natural outcome. It could also be on any given day that none of the gravel lands on my head. I find that a helpful way of monitoring my own behavior and my thoughts and all my actions. That what I do sets an example for myself first, and that in turn will set examples for others. And it's kind of like you launch the ship, it's now out at sea. So we tend to think, I got nothing to do with it, it's gone, it's launched. And to a certain degree, that's true. But it's still true that you launched it and you thought about it and put all those things into place, and those things are just part now of your mind stream. We're making a distinction here too, let's do this, a distinction between the brain stream and the mind stream. This is critical in the context of Buddhism. Because in the context of our culture, if you create all this bad karma and then you die, you escape the bad karma. That is pretty much how our culture would relate to it. Because the mind and the brain in our culture are pretty much identical. Or we could say the mind is an epiphenomena of the brain. In other words, the hierarchy is the brain is higher. This is exactly the opposite in the Buddhist structure, and it's interesting to ponder it, whether you think it's true or not. What if it was true is the appropriate question. What's different? And the first thing that occurs to me that's different is, if the mind is the organ of primacy, then the results of my actions, whether they were just things I thought or said or did, have more effect in the Buddhist context than they would in the Western context, depending on which one was true. But we generally just totally discount that. Like when we talk about the mind as separate from the brain, that pretty much cuts a lot of the power of many of the practices. I remember somebody asking Boka Rinpoche about this, and very similar kind of discussion, and he said, that you can think like that the mind and the brain, that the brain is actually the primary thing, that the mind rises as an epiphenomenon of the brain. If you all understand what that means, it's a result. The mind arises because you have a brain, not the other way around. So from a Buddhist perspective, the common approach is you have a brain because you have a mind. No mind, no brain. No science in any direction is going to be able to settle any dispute about that. It's not a subject for science at this point. So I have friends who think it's kind of silly, in fact. And I like to say, well, it could be silly. It could also be that you're silly. And sometimes people say things like, there's no evidence for that. Now that's a really interesting thing to say. There's no evidence for that. And I like to say, well, I totally agree with that. There's no evidence for it. But there's no evidence for it the other way, too.
Right.
So we're just at a total standoff. But I find it more interesting to the degree that I think it's plausible, and I tend to think why not? It's as plausible as anything. To ponder how the practices work if everything you do fundamentally affects everything from into the future, and that everything that you do, think and say now, is driven by what went before. It's like an endless chain of cause and effect that happen. And I think that's too simplistic in some ways, but I think the interesting thing is that whether or not that's true is completely not even investigatable, currently anyway. You can ask the question, you can hold an opinion, but that's all you get. you don't get any more. So then I ask the question, if I hold the brain as primacy or the mind as primacy, what, in this case, what do I get for that? Which one helps me? And I come down firmly on the side of the mind is my friend. It never gets brain cancer. It doesn't have a brain. I can just go down through the list. It doesn't die. I mean, it feels more holistic in a certain way. Like more things are kind of accounted for in the idea of the mind having primacy. Not so many things in the brain. In another way, I think somebody might say there actually isn't any difference. They're actually, which is actually in a certain way more interesting, but too complex for our little brains. Our little two brains. Okay, that was fun enough, but now we have to do some work. We are having this discussion precisely because so many really wonderful beings have lived and taught us and brought things to us, given us things. And feeling remarkably grateful for all of the gifts from the lineage. We now routinely, we like to recite a prayer for their long lives. And we can ask the question, does a prayer for the long life of somebody like the Dalai Lama affect the long life of the Dalai Lama? He himself was asked that question at a thing that I was at once. And in his classic stance, he says, who knows? Well, what page do we start on?
Mine says 47, page 47.
I'll bet you're right.
Well, Alan told me I am.
Oh,
Check.
very bad.
Because I don't. Thank you, Alan.
It is, I have 47 too. So the reason we cite long life prayers is straightforward. We're basically holding the wish that those who we feel, and in most of our cases here, experienced such great benefit by connection with Him that we hold the wish that others will also have that effect, and that we will continue to have the connection with these beings in future lives. So unless you know one of these, or appreciate especially somebody like His Holiness Dalai Lama, then you can just imagine that all of the great beings who have ever lived will continue to share their gifts with all of us. So beginning on page 47, let's see. Are you leading, Pat?
I am.
I love it. Thank you.
O Gari Rawe Kowe Shen Kam De Pendang De Wa Ma Lu Jun We Ne Chenrezig Wang Tenzin Jam So Yi Jape Si Te Bardu Tenjuchi Gyal Kunin Je Rang Su Karma Pa Gyal Kun Trin Le Chi Du Karma Pa Gyal Kun Dung So Wang Ke Karma Pa Organ Dro Du Trin Le Shab Ten So Ten Pe Pal Jur Karma Lo Dru Sha Tu Pa Sang Bo Yun Ten Ka Kyab Tu Pel Shen Sha Pe Ta Ten She Dru Ki Trin Le Cho Le Nam Ga Pa Var Cho Om So Ti Ne Den Ning Po Dak Shang Ka Du Dang Vi Me Ten Pe Ga Tsan Dro E Kum Chu Ki Tu Ku Gong Me Nam Tar Shen Sha Pe Ten Ching Se Trin Ge Jur Chi Om Svasti Ji Pa Kun Sel Du Pe Dun Ta Ra Tog Me So Ze Ma Chik Dro Ma Gong Pa Chik La Me Cho Tu Ning Je Wang Ka Gya Shab Ten Se Trin Ge Pa Zo Namatarya Yang Jang Dam Perik Se Ten Drogun Lab Sun Lun To Pa Gi Tu Gi Tong Nedun She Dru Sen Kyang Pa Wei Yan Tu Ki Gyat Sen Ka Gya Shab Ten So Om So Ti Jam Nang Ning Je Ke So Nu Maiden Tu Gyu Le Tam Pa Dan Lama Cho Du Je So Nam Shing Du In Chen Gi Zab Ju Tun Shen Ka Gya Shab Ten So Le Dong So Nam Wang Pa
shangpe se chunam nyang zhe che pa sing kyang lu se pe pa de lama kya kya shab ten so lama yedam da ki ten sung gi jin lam no dru trin lei el me tu dren cho lama kao ga shab ten chin to je shin le be me lon ru sho pa de lama shab pe ten pa dang kayam yang la de ke jun wa dang dakshen malu so sa dri jane nyu du san je sa la go
Which one? Where is it? Let's do it. I'm not familiar with it. Hmm? You mean the Mom Mudra aspiration? Oh. Kind of 50-50. Kind of 50-50. Hmm.